The king is dead. The Silmaril's been stolen, and now there will be war between elves and dwarves. Ruin is coming to Doriath. Maya, Govan, and Melian, and welcome to the fourth episode in this series explaining and breaking down Tolkien's epic First Age tale of the Silmaril of Doriath. I'm afraid for this episode you're going to have to excuse the state of my voice. I've had a really nasty cold that I was hoping would go away in time for this recording, but that has not happened, so I may not quite be my usual self today. Anyway, let's pick things up right now in the exact moment I left them off last time. Thingol's been murdered. The dwarves of Nogrod, whom Thingol commissioned to combine his Silmaril with the Nauglamir, have betrayed him. They've assassinated him and stolen the divine treasure that inspired all of this bloodshed. And the very first thing they do with it, flee the scene of the crime. We know very little about these dwarves, and we can only speculate on who their leader is, if they even have a leader. Maybe they are simply a dwarven mob who got carried away in a sinister moment and were then forced to improvise. Or perhaps this is much more premeditated than that. Maybe there are one or two artisans considerably more malicious than the rest, and they are the ones with their hands on the wheel. Or maybe all these dwarves of Nogrod are united in their declaration of war upon the Sindar. Maybe they think the Silmaril is worth the consequences. I'm afraid Tolkien never tells us. However, what we do know is that with the Silmaril/Nauglamir in their possession, somehow the dwarves do escape Menegroth. They flee into the woods, due east, hurtling through the forest of Region. They know if they can make it across the river Aros, they will have escaped the Elvish woodland. They'll be in the wild that they know so well, and the Sindar will lose their advantage, if they make it to Aros. Unfortunately, however, for these dwarves of Nogrod, if you ever find yourself running through an elvish wood while in conflict with wood elves, the odds will be forever stacked against you. Tidings travel swiftly among the trees, and although the dwarves do make it out of Menegroth, presumably through some kind of dwarvish back door, they do not escape Doriath unnoticed. When the Woodlands Marchwardens learn what's happened to their High King and to his Silmaril, the hunt begins. As the dwarves seek the eastern road towards the river, they are pursued by the keen eyes and deadly aim of the Sindar. What follows isn't exactly a battle. I imagine it rather as death raining down from above. We aren't explicitly told who led the Hunters of Doriath in this deadly pursuit, but I would confidently speculate it was late Thingol's chief captain, Marblung of the Heavy Hand, who is now potentially the highest-ranking Sindar in all of Doriath. And the reason I feel so strongly that it was Marblung who led this pursuit of the Nogrod dwarves isn't just because it's kind of his job, and also who else would be a more likely candidate. I also believe this part of the story is significantly improved by Marblung being in it. Marblung is a character we never get to see a huge amount of, but we see a little bit of him relatively often. He's been present in a lot of stories. He and Daeron were the first of the Sindar to have any dealings at all with the Noldor. Thingol sent him to treat with King Finigolfin at the Feast of Reuniting, the Mereth Adathad. He was a key member of the five-man band that hunted the greatest werewolf ever to walk the world, Karkaroth, as he rampaged through Doriath with this very Silmaril burning his insides. He was a friend to Turin Turambar at both the very beginning and the very end of Turin's adult life. He was a guide and companion to Turin's mother and sister as they ventured towards the dragon-guarded ruins of Nargothrond, and he was one of only two Sindar, the other being brilliant Beleg Cuthalion, who took part in the epic Fifth Battle of Beleriand, the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, where, in later writings, we are told he saved 3 of the woodmen of Brethiel who fought alongside him, and he healed them of their wounds. Over and over and over again, Marblung has been a hyper-competent supporting character who improves every situation he ever finds himself in. I think there should be some sort of, unsung hero award for Mablung of the Heavy Hand, considering all his epic efforts over the years. And don't forget the last time this very Silmaril was abroad in the woods of Doriath, in the possession of a murderous enemy when Eleuthingol first acquired it, Mablung played a particularly pertinent part in getting it to the High King. It was Mablung who cut open the werewolf Karkaroth. It was Mablung who withdrew the Silmaril from the wolf's belly, and it was Mablung who bestowed the Silmaril to Beren, so that in his dying act Beren could give it to Thingol, and his quest would be achieved. Mablung is one of very few elves who's ever held a Silmaril. 36 years ago, he bore it from the belly of the beast into the hand of Beren. I think it serves the story well that he should also be present for the other hunt that kind of bookends Eleuthingol's possession of the jewel. Anyway, regardless of who's actually leading the March Wardens in this moment, what we know for certain, their mission is accomplished. The Silmaril is reclaimed, presumably taken from the body of the dwarf who stole it. It is brought back to Menegroth, in my imagination, by Mablung, and there it is, in bitter grief, given to Queen Melian. Now, I will certainly return to Melian and Mablung in Menegroth in just a minute, but first, let's keep our eye on those dwarves. Whoever was holding the Silmaril lost it, along with probably their life. Almost all of the slayers of Thingol who flee into the woods are killed by the Sindar, but 2 individuals survive. 2 make it across the river. 2 flee into the wild. 2 escape over vast leagues of East Beleriand and vanish from the vigilance of the Sindar. Eventually, 2 return to Nogrod. And once they're home, these 2 dwarves, the only 2 beings in all of Middle-earth who actually know what happened to Eleuthingol, tell the rest of their people a story. They say somewhat of what befell, but they weave into their half-truths a poisonous lie. They claim the rest of their company was slain by the elves not following the murder of Eleuthingol, but upon his order. They say the Elven King tried to cheat them of their rewards, so he murdered them. The great craftsmen of Nogrod who lie dead in the woodland of Doriath were victims of elvish aggression. When the people of Nogrod hear this story, they are understandably devastated. Not only have, many lives been lost, but those great craftsmen sent to Doriath probably included some of Nogrod's finest artisans. There is lamentation throughout all of the Blue Mountains, but in Nogrod especially, there is also rage. They tear the hair from their beards, and they take long thought towards vengeance. And so, their lord, who was never named in the Silmarillion but in earlier writings was known as Naugladur, sent word to his neighbours in Belegost. He asks them for aid, for weapons, for soldiers. He wants Belegost to join Nogrod in their war against Doriath, in their sacking of Menegroth. But, very interestingly, Belegost denied him. And what's more, the dwarves of Belegost actively sought to dissuade their Nogrod kin from this violent purpose. Don't forget, it was the dwarves of Belegost who delved the halls of Menegroth in the first place. They built the Sindar's capital city. They surely must know many of its secrets, but they still have some friendship with the elves. They've been paid well over the years in both wisdom from Melian and pearls and other riches from Thingol, and they want no part in the violence to come, for they can clearly see the folly in it. And I want to point out a parallel here. The way the dwarves of Belegost respond to the dwarves of Nogrod rocking up in their home and saying, "Hey, we're about to do something incredibly stupid, you should join us," is exactly the same way the Teleri of Alqualonde responded to the Noldor after Feanor rocked up at their home saying pretty much the exact same thing. The Dwarves of Nogrod seem to be thinking like vengeful Noldor, whereas the Dwarves of Belagost seem to have a more Tellerine disposition. Worth underlining though, despite some parallels between Feanor and the Lord of Nogrod, after Belagost refused, there was no subsequent kinslaying. Nogrod, it seems, did take no for an answer. They don't exactly come across well in this story, but the Dwarves of Nogrod are at least one rung above Feanor on the moral ladder. Anyway, the Dwarves of Belagost do totally pass this test. They take no part in the violence to come, but unfortunately, they do fail to dissuade their neighbours from going to war. In the new year, a great army marches out of Nogrod and follows the ancient dwarf road west, towards the woodland kingdom of Doriath. Which segues us nicely back over to Melian and Mablung in Menegroth, to the hidden kingdom now that it's lost its king. If Thingol had a funeral, or if his body was ever interred anywhere, Tolkien never tells us about it. But Thingol was great and beloved, so I have to believe surely he must have. I imagine for a long time there must have been sorrowful songs in Doriath and tears unnumbered shed for their high king. But just before moving on to the main characters of this episode, Melian and Mablung, I first want to talk a little bit about the other elves, who we can be confident would have been in Doriath at this time of mourning, but aren't ever actually mentioned by Tolkien. A few episodes ago, I talked at length about Galadriel and Celeborn, and the mystery of what they might have been getting up to towards the end of the First Age. We know that in future ages, both of them will go on to have interesting and important dealings with dwarves, and both of them will have a lot to say to Gimli, the dwarf, at the time of the Lord of the Rings. I personally believe these interactions gain a bit of an extra dimension if we think of them as being precipitated and shaped and coloured by this conflict between Nogrod and Doriath in the First Age that Galadriel and Celeborn were present for. However, regardless of how we interpret their story, there are a few other elves who we can be even more confident were definitely present in these days of despondency following the murder of Eleuthingol. In Second Age writings, we will learn all about a pair of Sindarin lords called Orather and Amdir. One day, in the next age, they will lead a company of Sindar elves into the east of Middle-earth, and there they will establish woodland kingdoms in the forests that will become known as Mirkwood and Lothlorien. They will both fight in the War of the Last Alliance, and they will both die in the mud that's gonna become known as the Dead Marshes. Their backstories are mostly a mystery, but we are told both of them originated in Doriath, where they were both subjects of High King Eleuthingol. And what's particularly interesting is that Orather has a relatively famous son, Thranduil. We're never explicitly told when Thranduil was born. It might not have been until the very early Second Age, but from the limited information that we are given in the unfinished tales, we can at least quite confidently speculate his life began right at the end of Doriath's history. We are told he came from there right after its ruin. Which means I also invite you to imagine in this story a very young, potentially infant Thranduil, possibly witnessing the last days of Doriath from the arms of his father, Orather. And if he were present, it certainly would illuminate additional motives for his actions 6,500 years later in The Hobbit, when the elven king Thranduil imprisons Thorin Oakenshield and his dwarven company for trespassing in Mirkwood without an explanation. That moment hits differently if we imagine Thranduil's life beginning in Doriath. And I also want to quickly mention Celeborn's side of the family too. His brother, Galathiel, his father, Galadhon, and his grandfather, Elmo, the brother of Eleuthingol, are all present in Doriath at this time. But the truth is, we know absolutely nothing about what happened to them, or about how their stories end. So, if you choose to, you are entirely free to flesh out those details by imagining Eleuthingol's brother, his nephew, and his two great-nephews, the princes of the Sindar, all having their own opinions and perspectives on the High King's murder, and all still kicking around for the consequences. Obviously, we know Celeborn survived all that's to come, but the rest of his family? Well, that's up to you to imagine as you please. However, just before moving on, I will point out that Celeborn's niece, that's his brother's daughter, the Lady Nimloth, she is certainly not in Doriath right now. I'll talk about her more in a few episodes' time, but we know for certain she is currently hanging out elsewhere. She does not get caught up in this conflict with Nogrod. Anyway, moving back to our major characters, let's talk a bit about Melian the Maya, the widow of Eleuthingol, the queen of the girdle, and the current bearer of her late husband Silmaril. Following Thingol's murder, a heavy change falls on both Doriath and on Melian. She sits long in silence beside the body of the king, and her thoughts pass back into the starlit years when they met. She remembers Nan Elmoth, and the nightingales, and the 200 years they both spent enchanted, staring at each other in silence and falling powerfully in love. And Melian knows her parting from Thingol is the forerunner to another, even greater parting that she must endure. Just as doom has caught up with her husband, soon doom shall come for Doriath too. And there is nothing she can do to stop it. You might be thinking, this threat from Nogrod really doesn't amount to much, right? I mean, Doriath is protected by the girdle of Melian. Doesn't really matter how large or well-armed this dwarvish army is, there's no way they can pass her magical boundary. The hidden realm remains untouchable. Right? Well, unfortunately, that is no longer true. After Thingol dies, Melian's magic is diminished. Her girdle loses its power. To be honest, there's quite a lot to be said about this moment, yet it's not the easiest thing to explain. Remember in the first video of this Doriath series where I said Tolkien never quite finished this story, and there are a few details that we know must have happened for the narrative to work, but weren't ever explicitly stated, so when Christopher Tolkien edited his father's notes and compiled the published Silmarillion, there were a few things that he had to eke out himself? Well, it would appear the diminishing of Melian's girdle is one of those things. In the next episode, I'm going to do a full character breakdown explaining Melian the Maya story from beginning to end, and I'll go into much more detail on why this had to happen then. But for now, I will simply describe what we're told in chapter 22 of the Silmarillion. It is written that when Eleuthingol died, a change came also upon Melian. Thus it came to pass that her power was withdrawn in that time from the forests of Neldoreth and Region, and as Galduin, the enchanted river, spoke with a different voice, and Doriath lay open to its enemies. So, was Melian's girdle powered by her love for Thingol? Possibly. It certainly would seem without him, her magic disappears too. When she had her husband, she had the power to guard his kingdom, but now Thingol's spirit has passed west, and Melian's might seems to have passed with him. But I want to take a closer look at the exact language that's used here, because I think it provides us some clues. We are told, a change came upon Melian. She didn't change, the change was done to her. Similarly, she did not withdraw her power from the forests of Doriath, her power was withdrawn. I really don't think Melian chose to give up her girdle or to abandon Doriath, her home, her people's home, the thing she's protected for millennia. I think instead there is a greater power at work. Melian has the authority to guard an elvish kingdom under the rule of an elvish king, but she cannot put forth her power to rule over children of Ilúvatar as a Maya queen. It defies the design of Ilúvatar himself, and it would diminish the free will of the elves and dwarves in Middle-earth if she took up Thingol's reign. Without an elvish king to guard and to guide, Melian is just a Maya. And Middle-earth belongs not to the Ainur, but to the children of Ilúvatar, even if they are in the process of making terrible decisions. I guess it's easy to argue Melian should have just, stayed in Doriath and used her mad Maya powers to wipe out all of her enemies and rule the Sindar as a sort of god queen. On the one hand, maybe things would have been better if she had, at least in the short term. But then again, isn't that exactly what Sauron does in the Second and Third Ages? And wouldn't he claim that he ruled his dominions as a god king for all the right reasons? He made his subjects mighty, he brought order and perfection, he got rid of wasteful friction, and yet we know he was wrong. We also know Melian is one of the wisest Maya in all of Arda, second only to the guy who will one day become known as Gandalf. Her wisdom is mentioned on almost every page in which she appears. She understands what I think it's quite challenging for us to get our heads around. She was Doriath's queen, but Thingol was its ruler. His elves were never her subjects, and they shouldn't be. The children of Ilúvatar are free to deal with each other in whatever way they will, but they should never be ruled by one of the Ainur. Sauron will never understand that, nor will Saruman, but Melian does, for she is one of the wisest beings ever to live. And so, after her husband's spirit departs west and her power is withdrawn from the land, she sets her affairs in order, and then she leaves Middle-earth forever, returning to where she came from, to where her husband now waits for her. However, before she does so, Melian has one last duty in Doriath, one last person to speak to, for she must still bestow the Silmaril to a new bearer. And for this charge she chooses her late husband's chief captain, Marblung. She bids him also send word to her daughter Luthien, telling her that her mother's time in Middle-earth has now ended, and she effectively leaves Doriath in Marblung's heavy hands. He's not a king, he's not even a lord, but he is a captain, he is a guardian, and he is a legend among the Sindar. I should point out, if we do imagine Galadriel and Celeborn as being present in the story, then surely we must also imagine an inspiring farewell between them and Melian. Galadriel was Melian's pupil, Celeborn was Thingol's great-nephew. And although I can't go into any details, Tolkien never finished Galadriel and Celeborn's First Age story, my speculation would be this has got to be one of their most crucial moments, right? Certainly, if I were adapting this story for like a TV show or something, the last conversation of Melian with Galadriel and Celeborn would have to be an all-important scene. It is effectively a passing of the torch. Now, it is on Galadriel to become Middle-earth's semi-divine queen from across the sea, who guards and guides a hidden elvish kingdom inside a magical woodland alongside her particularly tall, silver-haired Lord of the Sindar husband. Over the next 6,500 years, that's the lengths of the Second and Third Ages combined, Celeborn and Galadriel will grow into the new Thingol and Melian. At the time of the Lord of the Rings, when Frodo Baggins comes to Lothlorien, he will be as awestruck by the Lord and Lady as the folk of the First Age were with the King and Queen of Doriath. They are destined to succeed, but it will take thousands and thousands of years for them to get there. If we try to build up the full story of Galadriel and Celeborn's lives, I would argue the death of Thingol and the departure of Melian is their ultimate turning point. This is the moment they begin their transition from, like, the next generation of elves into the elven leaders that the rest of the world are looking to. Their first steps on the road to becoming the ancient super elves that we know them to be in The Lord of the Rings. The Third Age's Thingol and Melian. Anyway, after bidding Mablung take care of her late husband Silmaril for her, Melian asks that he also send her words of farewell to Beren and Luthien far away in the summery south. And then she vanished out of Middle-earth and passed to the land of the Valar beyond the Western Sea to muse upon her sorrows in the gardens of Lorien whence she came. And this tale speaks of her no more. I will speak of her more in the next episode and try to draw out some final ideas about her character. Also, I anticipate I am going to mention Melian again in future episodes. I will remind everyone, the Tales of the First Age were not completely finished when Tolkien died. He never did get to write a cohesive ending to Melian's story, and so I reckon when I get to the last great tale of the First Age, her name will come up again in a couple of moments where I think maybe she might have appeared if Tolkien had lived longer and written more. But for now, and as far as what Tolkien actually did right, that is the end of Melian. It is the end of her power, her girdle, the end of her protection, and it's the beginning of Doriath's ruin. The dwarves of Nogrod draw near. They encounter no magical barrier, and so they keep going. Meanwhile, Mablung guards the Silmaril. He does not bear it, nor does he claim it. Instead, he locks it away in his late king's treasury. He kind of takes up the stewardship of Menegroth. He commits himself to the city's defense, and then he hears word of warfare in the woods nearby. The great battle company of Nogrod passes unhindered into the Sindar's country, and they march with such ferocity that none of the elves can withstand them. The dwarves are many, they are well armed, and they are fighting for vengeance. The captains of the woodland grey elves are cast into doubt and despair. They are powerless to prevent this dwarvish onslaught, and no amount of arrows shot from tree branches turns the dwarves in any direction save their intended target, Menegroth, and more specifically, the vault that houses Thingol's Silmaril, aka their Nauglamir. Now, I will continue the story in just a sec, but before I get to the Battle of the Thousand Caves, first, let me go back to that alternate version of the story that we're told about in Tolkien's lost manuscript concerning the Horde, an insight into how this story might have looked if Tolkien had fully updated it in time for the final Silmarillion. In this later, but never fleshed out version, Elu Thingol dies in a slightly different way and at a slightly different time. Remember, according to this manuscript, Húin Thalion brought a whole load of dragon-cursed treasure into Doriath when he arrived, along with a lot of violent outlaws. The dragon spell infected the minds of many in Menegroth, and violence was inspired between elves and men. In the end, Húrin's mannish outlaws were all killed by Thingol's superior Sindar. It was an evil deed. And, according to this manuscript, it is potentially the reason why Melian's girdle lost its power. Things aren't ever fully explained, but Tolkien wrote, either the girdle had been robbed of its power by the evil within, that's the dragon-cursed gold, or Melian had removed it in grief and horror at the deed that had been done, the murderous violence between men and elves. Neither of those things are ever mentioned in the Silmarillion, but here we are given a relatively unambiguous answer to the question, how did the dwarves get past the girdle? Turns out it might have been a consequence of Glaurung's curse upon Nargothron's treasure, which Húrin brought to Menegroth. Anyway, In this later version, Thingol still commissions the dwarves to combine his Silmaril with the now dragon-cursed Nauglamir, and he promises to pay them 1/10 of the rest of the cursed treasure for their work. But when the time came, he didn't pay. Instead of, murdering him, in this version, all the dwarves departed in wrath and returned to Nogrod, where the dragon curse seems to have worked its malevolence upon them, until enough greed is stoked that they march to war and demand from Doriath through violence the payment they believe they are due. In this version, Thingol is slain in the ensuing battle. His warriors perish, his halls are sacked, and the Silmaril is taken from his cold, dead hand. That's obviously not what happens in the Silmarillion, though. In all the published material, Thingol is already dead by now, and there's no mention of any dragon curse. Anyway, in the Silmarillion version, I guess the most official version, the dwarves come at last to the great bridge spanning the river Esgalduin. They fight their way over it, and once it is taken, the doors of Menegroth do not last long. The inviolable halls of Thingol and Melian are violated. The subterranean city that has stood for nearly 2,000 years, that was built by friendship between Doriath and Belegost, is brought to ruin by the dwarves of Nogrod. Tolkien doesn't go into much detail, but we are told there befell a thing most grievous among the sorrowful deeds of the elder days. Many elves are slain. We aren't given many names, but what I will say, none of Celeborn's family are ever mentioned in this story again, except for his niece. That's obviously not to say we should automatically therefore assume that all of them died in this battle, but out of Grandpa Elmo, Father Galadhon, and little brother Galathiel, we could speculate maybe one or two of them were victims of the army of Nogrod. I will leave that entirely up to you. But we are also told many dwarves are slain too. This is a full-on battle, and it's one that's remembered by both sides for many generations to come. Thousands of years' worth of bitterness begins right here in the slaughter of the Thousand Caves. Eventually, with many losses, the dwarves fight their way to Thingol's treasury, to the Nauglamir, to the Silmaril they crave so possessively. But when the warriors of Nogrod arrive at those doors, they are met by one of the Sindar's mightiest surviving sons, Mablung of the Heavy Hand. He stands against those foes and he does not yield. Presumably, he takes down a great many of Nogrod's finest soldiers, but before the doors of Thingol's treasury, while valiantly defending the heirloom of his king, Mablung, chief captain of Doriath, is slain by dwarves. Can we take a moment to appreciate Mablung? He is up there with, Beleg Cuthalion as one of the very best of the Sindar. No offense to Celeborn, who I also think is great, but Mablung, he was so loyal and so true and so dependable, he deserved so much better. But before the doors of Thingol's treasury, he drew his last breath and died in battle. The doors were overcome. The Silmaril immediately located, and in the Lost Manuscript version, against the better judgment of the wisest dwarves, it was stolen. Menegroth falls. Its halls are ransacked, its survivors scatter, and its conquerors declare their victory. Nogrod has won. Its craftsmen are avenged. Their blood price is pillaged, and Thingol is dead. Mablung is dead. Menegroth is dead. Doriath is lost. Melian is gone, and the Silmaril is taken. Which is where I am going to leave things right now. It is not the end of our story. The Silmaril has a lot more hands to pass through yet, but this marks a major moment in Belarion's history. Without the involvement of a single orc, or troll, or balrog, without Morgoth lifting a finger, the untouchable kingdom of Thingol and Melian falls to ruin. I suppose Morgoth does become a little bit more involved if we add in the details about the dragon-cursed treasure which infected the minds of men, elves, and dwarves, but even then, it is a dead dragon. This isn't a story about the forces of Morgoth winning some great victory. It's about his enemies failing to overcome themselves, their own worst instincts, turning on each other, choosing greed-touched hatred over uniting against him, allowing the Dark Lord to loom over their lives and their deaths without him issuing a single command. Anyway, in the next episode, I am going to explore the full story of Melian the Maya, from the beginning of time to her departure from Middle-earth. So, to make sure you don't miss that, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and be sure to click like and leave a comment on this video if you want to. You can now also support the channel on Patreon or Ko-fi if you'd like to, so follow the links in the description to those pages if you are at all interested. However, until next time, as always, my dear friends, much love, stay groovy, and Navair Melanin.